Welcome to your external task support for your grade A stars. Please remember that you need to start off with your titles which say A star 1, evaluate how the influence of the theory, philosophical approach, legislation or report discussed in B1 and A2 in relation to the theme of communication can affect health and social care practice. You also need the second one, which is A star 2, title that says reflect on your learning within this theme, your assessment of the evidence in NY, A1, your evaluation of theory, philosophical approach, legislation or reports in A star 1 to develop the recommendation for your own future practice. Do not forget your A star 3 title which says show evidence of a range of background reading or use of sources used selectively. So once you've got your titles in place, we can start looking at how you go about answering the question. If we take a look at the A star 1, it starts with evaluate. So what we can do is we can return to your guidance where it says evaluate and you look at the areas that you need to complete for that. It says examine strengths and weaknesses, any arguments for and against, and or similarities and differences. So you are going to have to look at two areas, almost like a seesaw event of pluses and minuses, to be able to see what judgment can be made. It does state, judge the evidence from different perspectives and make a valid conclusion or reasoned judgment. So this means that you may need to look at the perspective of different users within the organizations, such as perhaps the client and the practitioner, or you may want to look at how the government in comparison to an organization, in comparison to public view may be. So you want to look at evidence from perspectives which are different. Finally, it does say reference to current research or theory may support the evaluation. So if we report, should I say, if we return to A star 1, we can now have that in our minds before we get started with looking at it. So it says evaluate how the influence of theory, which you've covered before, philosophical approach, legislation, which you've also covered before, or report discussed in B1 and A2 in relation to the theme of communication can affect health or social care practice. Remember, practice meaning the workings of a healthcare professional or the workings of a social care professional. Your A2, which you already supplied your answer, must be achieved before your A star 1 can be achieved. This is again the expectation that you have to climb a ladder. So if your A is below your A star, you need to achieve your A before you get your A star. So it's just trying to remind you that you cannot skip ahead and simply answer a question on an A star if you haven't answered the question in your A grade. Learners must examine both the strengths and limitations of the theory that you talked about previously, philosophical approach, legislation which you talked about previously, or report identified in B1 and A2 on health and social care practice. Remember that you do have a continuation after your C grades whereby you do cover the same material except you're trying to do deeper level of writing and analysis. So you may find that if you have evaluated with your strengths and limitations of the theory or legislation previously in your A grade, you may want to bring those features into your A star and make sure that your A grade has what was expected for the A grade. Finally, learners may include judgments about how the theory, philosophical approach, legislation, or report affects practice within the evaluation. Remember the practice of healthcare professionals or the social care professionals and how they work within their evaluation. If we look at the A star 2, it starts off with reflection. So if we return to your guidance, reflect states that you need learners should consider their actions, their experiences, or their learning and think about how this could inform future action, learning, or practice. Here it is a perfect time for you to consider your own actions that you have taken, your own experiences such as work experience if you have done so. I know this year is a little bit difficult for this. And any learning that you have completed within your course as a main start, or if you have done any further courses outside of this one, which will help guide you for your answer. It says reflect on your learning within this theme of communication. What have you learned so far? Which will tell you something. Then it says reflect on your own assessment of the evidence in A1. So in your previous A grade, what did you state in your A1 that you can now assess? Furthermore, it says reflect on your evaluation of theory, philosophical approach, legislation, or report in A star 1. So what is your evaluation that you made here of what you have said, and how will this develop recommendations for your own future practice? So for you yourself in the future as a healthcare professional or a social care professional. Let's take a look. Learners must reflect on own experiences or learning in relation to the theme of communication. So once again, it's just about you here, so you can use I in this category of your answer. It says learners must reflect on the assessment of the evidence given in A1, and learners must reflect on the evaluation that you have provided in A star 1. So just above here, what have you said? And how do you think all the things and the judgments that you have made, the strengths and limitations of the theory or the legislation that you have discussed, will help you to develop any recommendations for yourself in the future in your practice? So do consider what kind of practice you want to get into. I would suggest that learners at this point are considering professions which are within the healthcare setting and professions which are within the social care setting. If you are not clear, do try and see how will this work if you stayed within the profession of healthcare or social care just for the requirements of this assessment. Of course, you do not need to stay within healthcare and social care, but it will make it much easier for you to look at the recommendations and how much they will work into a job with it, which is within healthcare and social care rather than something else completely, which of course due to personal reasons you may choose to do. But for the manner of the answering of this assignment question, try to, if you have to pretend, do consider thinking about how it will help you within a healthcare profession or a social care profession. Finally, with your A star 3, it says show evidence of a range of background reading or use of sources used selectively. Again, to achieve an A star grade, wider background reading must be demonstrated through different sources and used appropriately to support critical discussion. It is not simply about providing the least amount of references. Do remember that you have to have your 2 quotations within your each criteria to ensure you can showcase that you have read around the subjects, but it may not be enough because you want to have a critical evaluation, which can only happen once you've read more to be able to make judgments and to show the evidence for strengths and limitations and for the opinions and the judgments that you finally make. The more you have in the way of information, the more you'll be able to make a reliable judgment on this grade. So thank you very much for being here for the A star grade.